All right, we're gonna get started. Hello everyone, my name is Sid Ramesh. I'm one of the co-organizers of Madison Blockchain. So the other two organizers sitting over there, Eric Worthy and Brooks Boyd. Feel free to reach out to them if you have any questions about the meetup or you want to get more involved. So quick introduction about myself. Currently the CEO and founder of a company called Chain Guru. We're doing consulting for blockchain. We do education, research and development, more on the enterprise side of things. So I've been working on that for the last 2 months. Done a lot of enterprise blockchain research and currently more involved with open protocols. And one of them is Cardano, and I really like their design philosophies. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
I'm Arjun. I just moved here in October. I'm a software engineer, and I'm just really interested in Cardano. So,
fun fact, we actually met through Madison Blockchain. He was showing Cardano. It's I got it. And he started a newsletter, which we'll get to in the end. But yeah, so today's talk. Before I begin, actually, I want to thank the sponsors for today's meetup. 100 State, Jason, and 100 Crypto. I'm going to bring Claudia from 100 State to tell you a little bit more about the 100 Crypto co-working space and give it what they do.
Hey guys, so as Sid said, my name is Claudia. How many people here, just before we get started, how many people here have heard of 100 State? Show of hands. Awesome. Oh, I love rooms like this. So 100 State, we're Wisconsin's largest co-working space, and we recently just launched an incubator for companies focusing on blockchain development, blockchain tech, and cryptocurrencies, really a whole spectrum. And so Sid has been involved with that along with a handful of folks in the space, as well as Jason Pham, who really got that started. There was just a write-up in the Cap Times sort of outlining some of the work that we're going to be doing and our goals and our aims for that space. But if you have any questions, I'll be around at the end, and I would love to chat more and hear what you guys are working on. Thanks.
Cool, thank you.
And big thanks to Ouroboros too for the space. It's been really helpful. Cool. So what is Cardano? Let's get started. Before we get into Cardano, I just want to kind of back it up a little bit and talk to you about first generation blockchains, right? It's funny that we're all being past a couple of generational blockchains, as we know. So to begin with, Bitcoin really sort of fundamentally provided us with the notion of a blockchain. It allowed us to think of payments as packets. And it's the first implementation to sort of have the concept of programmable decentralized money. And a couple of the important facts, and as probably most of you know here, there's no central authority that governs a decentralized open blockchain. And Bitcoin specifically is a scarce digital asset. There's only 20 million Bitcoins can ever be in supply, and it has constant finishing rate. And what Bitcoin and sort of the first set of altcoins that came along with it provided was its first generation to sort of think about money differently and sort of provide an open source ecosystem where users and developers come together to work towards a platform and to make it better and actually have incentives aligned such that the whole network's value goes up over time. So that was the first generation of blockchains.
Cool, so the second generation, you guys probably know Vitalik Bittorrent, the founder of Ethereum. He wanted to do a lot of cool stuff on Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin maintainers didn't want it in the protocol, so he got together with some people and he created what we consider the second generation of blockchain, Ethereum. So Ethereum, I'm not sure how many of you are programmers in here or web developers, but one of the major advances in web development was JavaScript. So that took the kind of static sites you had back way early in the days, 1990s, and started to add things so we can get things like Gmail, Google Maps, stuff we love. So that really just expanded the use case of blockchains because we took it from a system that you could just send money to each other, and now we can program the sending of money to each other so we can have things like smart contracts, ideas that you send money based on external conditions. And so that's a lot different than just sending value from one account to another. With the smart contract system, you can take arbitrarily complex data value flows. Cool. So just history of Cardano. Started by the Cardano Foundation back in 2015. Most people didn't even hear about it until 2018. So they kind of were like a stealth startup. Most of the coins were sold in Japan, some of the other Asian countries, ending in 2017, and it was a really big requirement for know your customer, so they took really detailed records of everyone they were selling to. Mainnet, so actually being able to transact coins with other users took place September 29, 2017, so pretty recently. 31 billion was available at launch. There will only ever be 45 billion ever. Cardano, you can think of it as 3 entities. So the Cardano Foundation, which we already mentioned, that's kind of the non-profit foundation, kind of like the Ethereum Foundation. You have Emergo, which is a venture capital firm based in Japan. And then you have IOHK, Input Output Hong Kong, and they are a blockchain development company in Hong Kong. So they do a lot of the actual development of Cardano. So currently it's in its first era, the bootstrap era. So it's still in a federated state, meaning that it's not decentralized in terms of IOHK is actually running the servers that Cardano's on currently.
Yeah. And just a little background of the project was actually started by a group of people who actually used to be at Ethereum. So Charles Hoskinson, one of the notable figures in the Cardano ecosystem, he's actually the CEO of Ethereum before sort of they had the DAO fork happen and they split. Yeah, moving on. So what is third generation blockchains, right? You know, it's funny, like I said, like we've already passed 2 generations of blockchain, but now we're entering a new era or like a new phase where people are starting to realize that there's fundamentally some problems with scalability, with securing smart contracts, or just being able to talk to other blockchains and other assets that are out there. And how do you build a system of money that is decentralized and actually scale to billions and millions and billions of users, right? So that's what Cardano is sort of aiming at solving, and they're looking at 3 specific verticals, 3 being scalability, interoperability, and sustainability. And we'll get in depth for each one of those. So Cardano is based on a consensus algorithm called proof of stake. How many of you understand or know or heard of proof of work, the mining algorithm that Bitcoin runs on? Okay, so just to recap, for those of you who don't know what proof of work is, proof of work is a system in Bitcoin that allows multiple parties who secure the network to be able to solve these cryptographic puzzles in order to validate and verify new transactions and actually create new blocks in the blockchain in the form of mining. And they do that by having specialized hardware, and they have electricity costs that go into actually extinguishing a resource to provide a new asset or a new Bitcoin. The proof of stake is an alternative mechanism that allows you to do validation and voting on new transactions on each block, not through actually extinguishing resources, but through the stake that you have in the network. And by that I mean the amount of money or tokens that you have in the underlying network. So based on the amount of asset, that percentage that you own, you have a certain amount of voting power in the system to validate the transactions that happen. The stake, it also acts as an economic disincentive. So if malicious actors act against the protocol and try to do some things like double spending, or try to potentially attack it with a 51% attack where they have a majority of the stake and they try to actually cheat the network by being able to have a majority of the stake and actually attack it, then you have schemes in which you can actually prevent that from happening in a proof of stake system. So Cardano chose proof of stake for 3 main reasons, and this is sort of general across other proof of stake blockchains too. Through proof of stake, you can allow for a more secure voting mechanism, and you don't have to sort of depend upon worry too much about centralization of mining pools or such thing that happens in Bitcoin today. And you have more capacity to scale because you're not dependent upon extinguishing or wasting a lot of energy, electricity, and that was one of the biggest criticisms that people have for people who work blockchains, because by public estimates, Bitcoin and Ethereum spends about $1 million a day just in validating the transactions that happen in the network. And it also allows you to have innovative game theory systems in the underlying protocol, in the underlying consensus mechanism, that allows you to sort of build protections against potential centralization, or actually have schemes in place that can punish bad actors on the system. whereas in proof of work, it's a little harder to have those teams in place. So there are multiple proof of stake implementations. There's one that Ethereum is currently trying to move into. It's called Casper. There's multiple versions. And there's been proof of stake blockchains like NXT. That we more recently have something called Quantum. So you have other implementations happening, but Cardano specifically works on a proof of stake algorithm called Ouroboros. And this is actually derived from like a Greek word of a snake eating its own tail. And we sort of model that because of the way the protocol itself is designed into split time slots. I'm not going to get too much into depth of how the technical aspects of the protocol actually works in terms of the consensus there, but I'm just going to quickly summarize what the protocol is on a high level. So Orgos is a provably secure proof of stake protocol. What that means is that it works at least when 51% of the nodes on the network that actually validate the transactions, if they're honest, then it's provably secure with security guarantees. Ouroboros itself is built in a modular and flexible design that allows you to do, it provides you enhanced functionality to do things like sidechains or have better data structures for having different clients. So like if you have a wallet client, you'll be able to have a better data structure that improves performance. So you can think of Ouroboros as sort of an improvement to be able to adapt with other blockchain technologies that are being built out on the site. And they have a security proof called for closed strings. I'm not going to get into depth because then you have to go into combinatorial math and it gets a little complex, but I'll push that over another time. Ideally, you want to think of Ouroboros as a protocol where the times or the execution of the protocol itself is divided into these certain time slots where leaders in the network are randomly chosen and from a pool of stakeholders. So you as a end user or node, if you want to be able to be part of the validation mechanism, you can sort of stake your coins and be one of those stakeholders in a pool possible. Ouroboros has some assumptions. So some of the criticisms some people have that it works only in a partially synchronous environment. This is going more into the computer science distributed systems topics, but I'm going to defer back by saying just Ouroboros has some limitations, but it's going to be improved upon by future versions. There's a paper that the foundation is working on called Provably that is improving upon the security guarantees in a more semi-synchronous environment. So you are going to see improvements to Ouroboros itself in the future. So yeah, that's the consensus protocol. That's the proof of stake implementation that Cardano is currently based on.
So there's a core feature of Cardano is the separation of layers. So you have the settlement layer and the computation layer. So to take an example of Ethereum, Ethereum has the settlement and computation all in one. So the code that runs, the cool Ethereum smart contracts is in the same layer as the money's kept. So looking at it from a how can you improve that standpoint, having all that complex programming ability in the same chain as your money, if something catastrophic happens with the smart contract, let's say, you don't want that anywhere near your money. So Cardano made the decision to split those out into two layers. So the first layer is the settlement layer, and that's kind of where your money lives. And that uses an accounting model like Bitcoin. And it's very simple, it has very limited scripting, and this is so that basically programs can't make mistakes, it's very hard to attack. So simpler the better, less attack avenues. The computation layer is something like you can think of like Ethereum's smart contract layer. So you can do arbitrarily complex calculations in there, trying to figure out where the money's going. You can put in things from external APIs, so arbitrarily complex ideas. And so because it's arbitrarily complex, we want that separated from money. One of the big innovations is it actually allows different virtual machines to run. So one of the common critiques someone might say against a new blockchain is other blockchains already have such a head start, but with Cardano able to operate other virtual machines, there's backwards compatibility with other blockchains. So for example, they have what's called the KEVM. So that's just a formally verified version of Ethereum. So Cardano is going to be backwards compatible with ERC20 tokens and Ethereum smart contracts. And so not only are they backwards compatible, they're working on their own blockchain. It's spelled like that, but the pronunciation is actually Yella, so it's Romanian. So I didn't know that. I had to actually hear someone say that. And it's being developed by Runtime Verification, Champaign, Illinois. And I decided to give them a shout out because that's my hometown. And these are some of the smartest people on earth. They get 7 to 8 figure contracts from NASA and Boeing and places like that. So really, really impressive people. So just to go in depth on their virtual machine, because that's a core part of what all these smart contracts are going to be running on, what all the developers are going to be developing for. So it's a variant of LLVM, so a lot of programmers might know that as kind of a what you compile to, and then that it's like a middle interpretation. So I'm kind of rusty on compilers, so if I'm wrong, someone please correct me. It's a variant of that, and that was actually developed at University of Illinois. And the idea is you have a lower level layer that higher level languages can then compile to in a smart contract. So that's really good in terms of we have all these great developers out there that know their languages. They know Java, they know Go, they know Python. So instead of having to force them to use languages like Solidity, let's go to their language and make sure that they can come into our house. So it's defined using the K framework, and so the K framework is something that's been developed at University of Illinois for the past 15 years. So it's basically an executable reference model, and what that basically means is to support different languages, you just have this reference model, and then as long as the languages implement that reference model, they can compile into what you're trying to support. So some of the languages already defined include C, Java, JavaScript, Solidity. Cool. So this is another big innovation, or another big competitive advantage, you might say, to Cardano, is it's written in Haskell. So that's the first part. I'm not sure how many of you guys know what Haskell is, but it's what's called a functional language. And so this is considered harder by most programmers, but the idea is you are getting, the code is a much closer representation to math, like basic math, than it is computer code. So the two differences, imperative language, so like C, we're telling the computer what to do. In a functional model, we're making it like math, input, output, and then the computer decides how to do that. So that's considered usually harder by most programmers because we weren't taught that way. We were taught in the traditional form. So this is actually if I had to pick one of the biggest advantages, it's formal verification. So this is a software development technique, and this is we take a system and make it into a mathematical representation, and then we can have a certain level of guarantees that there is no, bugs in the system. To a certain extent, there'll always be hardware issues, stuff like that, but you get a mathematical level of certainty. So this is used in all mission critical systems, like I said before, that runtime verification company, they have big contracts with NASA and Boeing. So all that software has to, either by regulation or just industry standards, meet this certain level of assurance that it's that secure. So in my opinion, to make a global financial system where we're going to exchange billions of dollars in value, even trillions maybe, you're going to need a system which is formally verified that everyone can trust and say, hey, we looked at this as deep of a level as possible.
I differ a little bit. I think formal verification is good too, but there's always also humans behind it, right? So you can't really stop humans from sort of controlling and changing things. But purely from a technical standpoint, formal verification is great. But for those of you who don't know much about it, it's actually a very expensive process, which is why not many people choose to do formal verification.
And because it's one of the core aspects of Cardano, I thought I'd throw this Wired article in, and it was a really good read. Basically, the idea was the military was trying to hack a Little Bird, those cool helicopters you might have seen Black Hawk Down. And so the big quote was, even though they got 6 weeks, once the code on the Little Bird was formally verified, the red team was not able to hack through the defenses. So I thought that was a really good example of the use cases of formal verification. And then I think it's amazing we're taking this idea, this level of certainty to blockchain, to our financial systems. Cool. So our next topic will be interoperability.
So one of the big components of interoperability, at least in the Cardano ecosystem, is just sort of this notion of sidechains. Sidechains are basically a way that allows you to transfer multiple different crypto assets across multiple blockchains, so they can like sort of talk to each other directly. And they do it in such a way that you don't need a counterparty to facilitate that transfer. And this is very useful for blockchains to be able to talk to each other through sidechains, because through this way you'll be able to sort of utilize some of the features or experimental new features that other blockchains provide. So you could probably have a sidechain between Bitcoin and sort of Ethereum, maybe Ethereum Classic, where in Ethereum Classic you have sort of a Turing complete scripting language, right? You have other features to write smart contracts, but in Bitcoin you probably necessarily don't have that. So you'd be able to transfer your Bitcoin to another chain and then use that as sort of the underlying asset to be able to do contractual applications, right? And this is sort of one of the examples of how you use a sidechain. But Cardano is trying to base some of their experimental features through building new sidechains and also integrating other protocols into their computational layer. So Cardano will be implementing a specific protocol called the KMZ sidechain. So this is actually work being done by 3 researchers. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that Cardano is actually based upon a lot of scientific rigor. So they actually have a lot of partnerships, or IOHK, the company building, actually has a lot of research partnerships with many universities across the globe who are doing blockchain research on many different things. So one of the things they're working on is a sidechain protocol that is based upon another paper that they wrote. So they keep publishing a lot of these papers. So if you go online and just see the Cardano academic work, there's just so much rigor that goes behind the scenes. But the protocol itself is based on a primitive that allows you to have proof of work blockchains easily integrated into their existing sidechain model. So to begin with, so this is a typo, but the computational layer that Arjun was talking about will actually be a sidechain implementation on top of Cardano. And you could theoretically have many other types of blockchains also be a sidechain if they follow the protocol.
So to go back to our idea that we want these systems to be worth billions to trillions of dollars. Right now, almost all of that money is locked up into the traditional banking system, a traditional financial system. And so after 9/11, especially, we had so many financial regulations. You really had to know your customer on stuff, anti-money laundering. Banks now have a legal requirement to fill out suspicious activities. And so the financial system is very self-contained, it's very regulated, it's very strong gatekeepers. And so to be able to operate with this system and be able to access these trillions of dollars locked away, Cardano is taking it as one of their main goals to be able to interop with that system. And so the primary idea of it is they're working on, you're able to you can optionally add metadata to your transaction saying, hey, this is me sending, from this account to there. So one of the big, hopefully, innovations blockchain's going to bring is identity verification online, because that's one of the traditional problems. So when we're able to verify our identity online, we should be able to securely attach that identity to transactions in a way that a bank will now let our transaction go through, and we're complying with all the regulations. And again, this is an optional system, so if you never want to talk to a bank, you only want to, send coins to your friends, you never have to touch this. This is just simply for, businesses or whoever wants to interact with banks. And to go back to the idea of separated layers, and we have different VMs we can run on the computation layer, one of the cool aspects of that is you can start running some of the computation in a regulated environment. Let's say a country will only let smart contracts run under these certain parameters. You'd be able to plug in a VM that could support those kind of parameters.
And then you get into sort of the enterprise permission ledger stuff that you can do on the computation layer.
So one of the core parts of Cardano is actually the dataless wallet. So most coins have a wallet. Like other coins, it's electron-based, so in my opinion, that's a good thing. You're based on the web. Web's always going to, maybe not always, but as far as I can see, web's going to be here. A lot of people know how to do web. Web is all about interoperability, open standards. So this wallet's going to be based on Electron, and it's aiming to be a multiple currency wallet. So the first coins they're trying to support is ADA, which is Cardano's coin, Bitcoin, and Ethereum Classic. And then in the future, they hope to add other coins. And as this wallet gets built on, they're wanting it to be a whole application layer where you can have a store, and you can think of like Chrome web plugins. So ideally, in the future, the wallet itself will be an application layer people can develop on. Okay, and to get to our last part of Cardano, the last of the three elements of a third generation blockchain, this idea of sustainability. So for a lot of coins now, you've heard of ICOs, and so we can think of ICOs as like an IPO. We get a lot of money in the beginning, but a fundamental problem with that model is what happens when the money runs out. Another model you can think of as donation, but it's kind of hard to rely on donations. So one of the big aspects we're thinking about for the next generation of blockchains, how can we keep the system going so it can be financial infrastructure? So it's got to be around for a long time, and it needs incentive for people to improve it and add on to it. So Cardano's going with the treasury model, inspired by Dash's treasury model. I'm not sure if you guys seen Dash, but basically there's a giant collective pool of money, and that can be funded through different ways. I think Dash might tax the miners, and then the community votes on what proposals get funded. And so they're not, this is the furthest part on the roadmap, so this is the part that's most open to things changing down the road. But the fundamental idea is based on liquid democracy, and so that's a mix of direct and representative. So if there's an issue, you can either vote directly, or you can delegate your vote to an expert you trust, and they can either delegate it or vote directly. So kind of a mix of the different democracy systems. And as again, a lot of this is up in the air technically, but one of the core components is they want votes to be private, because then you can't, threaten people, hey, you better vote this way, or we're going to come beat you up. So privacy is a big part of voting, because if people know who you vote, that's obviously not ideal. You can have people threaten you. And then finally, the last part is they want to add the ability to fork, the idea of a fork inside the protocol. So right now, when you have like Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, Bitcoin Cash, these are huge like community splitting events, because there's not really a built-in system for us to decide on the direction of the chain. So the idea they're trying to do is make the protocol like a constitution, and like a constitution, there's certain ways you can amend the constitutions.
Yeah, and just to add, so the company that actually currently building Cardano, IOHK, is a prominent company providing developers to actually work on it. It's contracted until 2020, but afterwards, when the treasury model is built out, there could be other companies, there could be other developers who sort of go through this treasury system to propose new things into the protocol. So it's going to be sort of a collective vision, not just one party controlling it. So what's ahead? This is the really interesting stuff. So there's a lot of work that Cardano needs to do, a lot of promises, a lot of features that they want to implement. They have a pretty big development team, at least IOHK does. There's a lot of news around it, but the first thing that's coming soon is going to be the fully decentralized proof of stake implementation. We're hoping somewhere in mid-2018. I think June is probably when they're probably going to launch their fully decentralized version of the protocol. That means that each one of you will be able to sort of run a node on this network and actually be part of the actual system by storing copy of the blockchain and actually interacting with it. And by virtue of that, you'd be able to sort of have your coins be able to be staked onto the network and actually earn you. You're actually incentivized to do that because you will earn you a dividend in some form or the other. They're also trying to support smart contracts, so you'd be able to sort of write and then build decentralized applications by the end of 2018. So they're trying to integrate the KEVM that Arjun was talking about, as well as the Yella.
Yeah.
And you'd be actually able to write contracts in your preferred language under the K framework. And we're hoping that if this is successful, then we'll be able to see quite a bit of shift from the Ethereum dApp community to actually move to Cardano. I think that's my hope. The other things that are in the pipeline are the enterprise Cardano initiative. So they're trying to actually do something very similar to the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance or other permission chains like Hyperledger, R3, and so on. So there's a lot of communities that are trying to build more closed loop blockchain systems. It's more of the architecture that can be run by a couple institutions. So they're trying to do the enterprise version of Cardano. So use a business, if you prefer to have a more closed blockchain network between you and your business network, to be able to do that on Cardano. And then you have the yellow virtual machine integration and the sidechain. And the first sidechain probably will be integrated will be the CCL, not the CSL, the computational layer. They're also looking at other ways to sort of abstract the computation and storage of the blockchain itself. They're looking to other like networking design tools like Rena. They're in the exploratory phase of doing something called sharding. So they're looking at a lot of different scalability solutions and going back to the literature and actually comparing different techniques to see which ones would be applicable. And the next generation of Ouroboros, the proof of stake protocol will be Prowls, and they already have a spec and implementation on their GitHub code base. And of course, to end with that, they're eventually going to have a treasury governance model and add that as a change to the protocol. So that's pretty much our talk. One thing that I wanted to add, forgot to mention in the beginning, was that Cardano's like philosophy as a whole is sort of synthesized like two different mindsets. Like one is the scientific rigor, another one is like sort of the pragmatic like startup approach. What we're noticing in blockchains, at least the public open blockchains that we're seeing today, is that you either have a very slow governance development process, like what Bitcoin is going through, or do you have a very like break things and move fast type of approach for Ethereum, which is why sometimes you see they run into issues with their smart contracts or their bugs in the system or scalability roadblocks. But what Cardano's trying to do is like take the academic rigor that we've been using for decades and then apply that to blockchain technology. And then also have a team of engineers who sort of have a very startup mindset to actually implement things faster. And this is like one of the best things for researchers to actually see your research being implemented immediately, right? And that happened with Orgos on the proof of stake protocols, and that's sort of like a huge change that we're seeing and witnessing in the blockchain space through Cardano. So these are a few resources. So if you're interested in learning more about Cardano, they've done a lot of documentation, and they have a team actually dedicated to providing the community of resources. One place that you would definitely want to start is the Cardano Hub. It's sort of their central website, and then you can sort of see all the communication channels that they have and other information about how they got started and so on. I'm going to pull a plug for my newsletter. I started, it's called Week in Cardano. We're trying to like sort of give updates about the Cardano community and sort of provide like tidbits for people to quickly summarize and see what happened in the community in a given week. And we only have 2 issues. We're going to be publishing more going forward. You can check out our Medium publication, also the website if you prefer subscribing by email. If you're a developer, if you're more interested in the technical implementations, or you're just curious about it, Cardano Docs is a good place to go. They have a lot of information over there, and it's constantly being updated. I mean, it's still pretty nascent, if you ask me. And if you're overall, if you're just trying to understand why Cardano and like want to hear a summary of this talk and to see some of the design principles that they follow, the last website link is also a good place to get started. Well, that's it from us. If you have any questions, open for questions, and we have like 15 minutes.
So what is actually running today as far as what the Cardano network is? It's not a public proof of stake implementation at this point. Who's running it now, and how is consensus reached?
Yeah, so I think Arjun mentioned briefly. So the nodes that are doing the consensus process are currently controlled, the servers that are run by 3 particular parties. One is the IOHK group that's actually doing the development, and then there's Emmergo, another company, and then the Cardano Foundation. So the nodes are centralized, but the protocol is public, and you can interact and you can actually exchange value.
I have a similar question. So you talked about sort of the last slide, like the things that are coming for 2018, and it seemed like all of the stuff about Cardano was there. So what is actually like being distributed right now?
Yeah, so currently you can sort of just do value transfer. They have a wallet, so you can basically send money to addresses and other accounts. And they have Ouroboros implemented in their proof of stake system, so that's fully implemented. However, the nodes are centralized. And maybe just to answer your question in full, it is centralized today because they don't want one party to take control of the stake and actually execute an attack on the network. So it's actually, they're hoping that the stake distributes fairly over time, that you have a more fairly distributed like network before you launch fully decentralized. And they want to prevent a potential like 51% attack from like a malicious person. So that's why the nodes are sort of centralized right now. But they're working towards building in protocol measures through game theory, and that's sort of like one thing that I'm waiting for. And by like mid 2018, once they like fully launch a decentralized version of their proof of stake protocol, you'd be able to stake your coins either individually or through a stake like stake pool, which is basically.
You mentioned, like, so I guess I think you said 35 billion coins and 45 billion total. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I guess could you just talk more about like, Bitcoin supply and is it like a block reward or I guess how does I'm assuming it's block reward somehow.
Yeah, so once the Shelley kind of the mid 2018, once it's actually like a public ledger and it's not being run by these companies, the idea is it's staking, so people will be able to earn coins relative to how much they have. Now, in terms of how much they earn based on it, that's all up in the air. So they're still working out, as you said, like game theory aspects of how do I incentivize people to run nodes on the network. So in terms of how it's mined, it's just proof of stake, kind of like any other proof of stake system. In terms of how much you make, that's still all up in the air. So we hear more in mid 2018.
And just out of curiosity, you said it's available at launch. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean that?
I can answer that. So these many tokens are actually sold in their initial token offering, and this is like spread across multiple users and people, investors who actually bought in the ICO, and that was made available at launch, and people could like trade on exchanges or send it to other parties. But that was how much that was sold initially. But the rest of the supply, so there's 45 million, so the rest of like 14 million or so will be issued over time. And that is something it's being worked on with others. I mean, they already have some mechanism in place, they're just testing different implementations or game theory structures.
Question about AML and KYC, money laundering, KYC, know your customer.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about that as a potential strength of Cardano. Can you talk to that as it relates to sidechains, specifically as it relates to comments that were made by Andreas Antonopoulos a couple maybe weeks ago now in terms of KYC, AML, as it goes into a sidechain kind of environment, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a nightmare scenario to uphold that.
Yeah, hard to track where it's all going.
Can you talk about how Cardano's dealing with that? Is it in the metadata that you're proposing, and that's given that that's optional? Is that something that'll live on or be enforced, or how do you see that sussing out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've not heard what Antonopoulos is saying. I can check it out later. But my understanding is that when you have sidechains that are unregulated, then the value transfer that happens from the main chain will just normally flow through. If it's a regulated environment, you're going to have KYC to actually get in. So you'll know the source of the funds and where it's exiting. They're not going to have like heavy KYC ML on the settlement layer where the deposits are stored across addresses. So the only, I don't know what the criticism of sidechains and AML is, but if you have a sidechain with its own regulated environment, and if you know the source of the funds, then I don't see there being a potential problem because you're going to have to associate those funds to a particular user. But if it's unregulated, yeah, I mean, there could be potential problems.
I think part of what he was saying was you get so far away from the client that you're supposed to know
Yeah.
that it becomes impossible to actually enforce that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the aspects that's on the roadmap. So I'm not sure the definite implementation. I'm thinking though, I also didn't see the critique, so I'm interested in checking that out. But I'm thinking if the person interacting with the bank has to identify themselves, I'm not sure. Like if you bring cash to a bank, I'm not sure how far back a legal system can really realistically require someone to have the knowledge where the money came from. So I can't directly answer your question. That's actually a really interesting question. I hadn't heard that one before. So yeah, I wish I could give you a better answer.
Let's see if I can send you what.
Yeah, please do.
Well, yeah. Any other questions?
The proof of stake, it says something about like 51% being honest or something. Can you just like, what does that mean? I know you didn't talk too much about the proof of stake algorithm, but
Yeah, sure. So that's a good question. So what Ouroboros, the implementation is trying to say is that very similar to like the 51% honest majority party that you see in proof of work, you need to have at least 51% of the nodes that are doing the validation to be honest in order for you to have consensus actually work. So if you have a party with 51% of the stake or more, and is a malicious actor, then you're not going to have a secure protocol. It is prone to attack. So that is how they conclude it's fully secured. And they have other security guarantees, and this sort of flows back into their forkable strings methodology. So what they have is like a combinatorial analysis that shows that they can build a sort of a data structure that can tell you like at what block there could be a potential fork. They sort of estimate over time, and they try to prove that through other assumptions that will not be possible. So it's very hard for you to have forkable strings in the network, and both intuitively as well as like they have the assumptions to show that you will not have a forkable string. And the forkable string is a problem if you have potential a malicious actor in the system. But yeah, basically, if you had a 51% stake in the network, you want to have a security guarantee that prevents a party with a higher threshold to be able to attack the network.
I guess I'm just curious. Like, I don't know too much about proof of stake, but I guess like how do you define malicious and honest? And I guess that's what I'm curious about. Is like,
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
Sure. So I guess like for a simple example would be like if you are doing something like selfish mining or like double spending in your system. So selfish mining is if you're a party with like a higher stake, you're sort of like adding more blocks before everyone else can like hear what the other person is doing. So if you have say a higher computational power in Bitcoin, for example, you're sort of hearing and adding new blocks before everyone else, and then you're telling the entire network that have not heard the other blocks. So you're sort of like, you have an advantage because you have a higher computational power. And then when the other party sort of identifies a block, you say, oh, I already validated this, so you probably will not get a deposit. That way you're able to sort of subvert the network by selfish mining. And that gets into the whole concept of being able to prevent that, and they have forkable string methodology. But the honest party is one that's validating for the benefit of the network and is actually not doing things like that. And that sort of, and a malicious party would do things like double spending and giving like the wrong outputs to the other nodes in the network. That's sort of like a very like high level explanation. But if you want to get more of the distributed systems like explanation, we can talk later.
Do you anticipate that Cardano's going to have any issues scaling?
They're going to try their best. So obviously this is a global distributed computing system, so that's about as hard as it gets in computer science. So the best guarantee I can, or the best way I can put it is they're really smart people working really hard on it. And versus, so kind of Ethereum's going through scaling problems, and kind of the difference in foundation was Ethereum was creating something totally brand new, and so they moved really fast. They didn't really think about the really fundamental underpinnings of stuff. So the best I can really say is Cardano took all the like scientific research, all the problems that they saw Ethereum was having, and this is their best guess on what a scalable system looks like. So I can't say that it's not going to have scaling issues. I can just say that they are working to make sure it doesn't.
Do you have specifics as to what they're doing differently from Ethereum?
Yeah, so all the things that we mentioned, things like separating the two layers, and then side chains for sure. And then, they're looking at sharding and other ways. I think proof of stake itself is one way of scaling. It might not be the core definition of their way of scaling, but they're looking at a networking protocol called Vina, so you can actually not have to validate the whole blockchain. You can validate certain instances or certain copies of sharded information, so you can have tiny pieces that you are assigned to sort of validate instead of having to do the entire consensus process across the entire global stake.
Yeah, actually one thing I should mention, one of the foundational technical ideas of it is it's going to try to be a system like Bittorrent, in that as more users join the system, more nodes join the system, the power of the network increases. So traditionally in something like Bitcoin, it's not like that. There's a certain amount of pie at the table, and then you're just adding more pies to the table. So the idea of Cardano is they're trying to do a BitTorrent model where then instead of that, you're adding more tables that people can sit at. So there's these things called epics, and so this is getting in more of the technical details, but they split up the computations that traditionally, blockchains, their security model is everybody on the network's running the same thing. So the idea is they're going to, as more users join the network, you can split up sections of the network, and they can all operate independently. And then so as we get more nodes on the network, we can have more, split up sections of the network where everything can run concurrently. So that would be their answer, I would say, to scaling, is a system like Bittorrent where as the network grows, the power of the network grows.
Does that mean there's going to be multiple blockchains, or how are they going to?
Yeah, there will be multiple blockchains, and that comes into the concept of side chains, and it will be dependent upon that. The settlement layer itself is just a very simple. It's very similar to Bitcoin, except they've had a new scripting language to allow for things like side chains, and there's 5 different features that they try to differentiate their UTXO model from Bitcoin. But you'll have multiple blockchains on their computational layer, and you'll have things like sidechains. You could have multiple blockchains, and that is one way of get reading of your scalability issues and transferring the load of multiple chains, and splitting sort of the transactional activity on other chains as well.
The separated things, like you said, communicate through side chains, so we don't have to open up all the layers and it has to scan this whole other blockchain. So they're pouring money into sidechain research. So the idea is through these really efficient links, you'll be able to see what's going on in other chains.
And one thing I like is that they're using the UTXO model similar to Bitcoin, and we've just seen some of the issues that Ethereum is having, their network being clogged by just a few applications for smart contracts. But theoretically, Bitcoin does have issues with their transaction fees and higher all that stuff, but it does as a UTXO model function pretty well, and it scales as the network grows. But overall, we definitely see more interoperability happen, and that is one way of scaling.
There are other third generation blockchains that you know about or are interested in?
So there is a few competitors that Cardano has, but none of them really have sort of this academic approach to it. So there's a couple ones. I'm not going to get into too much detail how they're exactly different because I'm not fully sure how they operate. But there's a couple of ones like EOS is one of them. It was actually started by a person called Dan Lambert, who used to work with Charles Hoskinson, one of the co-founders or founders of IOHK. And the other one is called Definity. They also have a provably secure proof of stake algorithm. Each one of these blockchains will have their own benefits, but this is sort of my take. If you have multiple third generation blockchains, it's actually good because Cardano will be able to try to interoperate these systems. But at the end of the day, I think what's going to happen to be I think it's going to be very similar to what you have in traditional software. If you have a bigger developer ecosystem on one platform, say Ethereum, and you have community around that, that is really powerful. So one thing that Cardano is aiming at is like, how do you attain social scalability with their network? So they're already like, if you look at IOHK and the material that they provide online, they're like doing a lot of like video content. They're doing a lot of developer education and stuff. So the goal is to be able to attract a community around it, and the one that does that would probably end up like taking the majority of this financial application under it.
Yeah, the one I know is Tezos.
Tezos, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but I know Tezos also tries to do like an academic approach, and they're also trying to do things like treasury model, stuff like that. So I'd check out Tezos.
They're actually working, I think, in partnership with Cardano. I think they have a good relationship, but they're facing some of their own issues internally governance. So there's the human side of things that is inevitable, that always happens, and it is a limitation to public protocols like Cardano, whatever, Tezos, and so on.
So you talked about Ether to be a second generation and Cardano to be third generation. Where does Neo fits in? They are also very good competitor to in this space,
Yeah.
where they are better than Ether in terms of scalability, issues handling, and way ahead of Cardano compared to what they already have practically right now.
So from my understanding of Neo, and I could be wrong, so please correct me, they aren't a fully public blockchain like Ethereum and Cardano, so they're not direct competitors. My understanding with Neo is it's more of a permissioned ledger.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it private at all? That's private.
I think some of the
assets?
features are still private, they've not been deployed. But yeah, I think like they're trying to like abstract the gas model into like two ways. I think they have their own like network token for like supplying and running contracts. They're still not extensively like peer reviewed. I'm being biased when I say that. I think that's like pretty valuable because some of the research that happens in Cardano before it's being implemented is actually being heavily scrutinized by well-known academics, and it goes through like a rigorous approach to be able to prove that these systems mathematically work. But yeah, Neo is a competitor, especially from a business side, because they're both based or like targeting like the Southeast Asian market. So I guess like the network or the community will decide like based on what the developer experiences of what application we build on top of it. But I just don't see a lot of like education or like necessarily community work that Neo is doing. It seems like they try to brand themselves as the Chinese Ethereum. So it seems like a very like, and don't quote me, it seems like a very like similar like copy of Ethereum in some ways, but just with a better, different branding. But that's just me being biased. But it will still compete, and applications are being built on top of it. Sure, others need it, but there's a lot more advantages to using Cardano as a platform because you have different features that you can choose to work with or not. Any more questions? All right.
I'm kind of thinking out loud, but I'm just curious if you have, and maybe this is part of what you're saying, they're still trying to work out, but so if like 2/3 of the coin supply was in the ICO, are you worried about making like an oligarchic system where it is proof of stake, then, or you not have like 2/3 of the coins already out there with a stake and new users in the system, or is that a valid concern?
Yeah, but I think like if you look at the distribution across their tranches, they have like 4 tranches. Like one party like has like a majority stake, and if you are worried that like the 3 parties running the nodes and getting all the transaction fees through validation, they're actually burning those tokens. It's going to be a very small supply. So yeah, you can probably go look at the distribution. It's like it's all transparent, which is really nice. And I think a lot of the ICOs and a lot of projects that are fundraising don't necessarily like publish those reports. Although like this was done in stealth and like it was done, and there are some concerns for why it was done. But if you ask me, it's purely the regulatory environment is not very friendly and will not be very friendly moving forward for doing sort of this venture capital raise. But after the Senate hearing, I'm a little more bullish on the ecosystem as a whole. But yeah, you can go look at the distribution, and they have a whole other report of how they did their ICO, like who are the parties and holders of it. But that is one of the concerns why they're waiting for the stake or distribute a little bit more fairly before they have their full decentralized implementation, before people can start staking.
Yeah, that is a good point, because in a proof of stake system, you got to be really careful who has the stake. So on, I believe, Cardano Hub.org, because this whole sale was done under Know Your Customer laws, they have a full, like you said, a full audit of like all the demographics that were sold coins. So if you're interested in that, I'd check that out.
Yeah, but what is the key? I think for the next couple ones is for them to hopefully like figure out a good game theory model, right? Because things like Ethereum like have like at least like unlimited inflationary rate right now, like perpetual at least, and those are some concerns that we're not really sure how Ethereum is going to transition from proof of work to stake. Although Casper is a very good implementation in theory, in practice, there's other political issues, there's governance process, and so on, how that happens. Now that Cardano actually has an implementation that is working, and if they transition well into a decentralized mode, that is going to be a huge milestone. And that's when you really start to see the value of their network, because then, that's the whole point of blockchain is a decentralized aspect to it, right? But yeah, there's a lot of good research happening, so pretty confident that will come out eventually. And the timelines are looking good. They have a website called CardanoRoadmap.com, and you can go see some of the progress that they're doing, how far they are in implementing things. And yeah. Any last question? Oh yeah, one more. All right. Well, thank you so much.